The next book is part for my, I should just stop talking is really what's happening here. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some cozy fall recommendations. So I decided, I haven't done like a recommendations video for like fall books in quite a while. And that's because a couple of years ago I did like a good couple of recommendation videos for like if you want spookier books or if you want cozy books, depending on what part of fall you're in. Because like for me, I always want like spooky witchy books in the beginning of the fall, and then at the end of the fall I want like those cozy mysteries. And I thought, let's do a different kind of recommendations video today for people who were like me and want like that fall aesthetic but don't like horror and are scared to get. Because I hate horror. Like, you guys know if you've been on this channel at any point that I do not like horror books. So I thought I'd make a video for people like me who, like I said, want fall aesthetics, fall feeling books, but don't want to be scared. So I have 15 books and or series here to talk about. I will leave those two videos I just mentioned down below if you'd like to check those out. I think there might be one crossover from those books or from those videos, but beyond that, all of these are relatively newer books. I was trying to hit a bunch of different genres as well. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Let's get started. So starting out the gate is one that I read last year and I think is perfect for people who like the mystery thriller vibes but don't want to be scared, but also kind of want to like solve a mystery and like, you know, are reading along and finding clues and stuff. And that is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This book I adored. This is the only book I've read by Agatha Christie that's not a Poirot novel. And I've heard fantastic things about it and it did not disappoint. This book follows 10 strangers who were kind of lured in different ways to this island. It was very secluded and they were all brought here for a specific reason, and all of the reasons are different. And so they get to this island and they find out that like the person who brought them there is basically convicted all of them for one reason or another of something bad they did in their past, and so is killing them off one by one based on this nursery rhyme about 10 soldiers. And so it's these people who are trying to figure out who did it because like they're convinced that whoever did it is part of their party because of how you get on the island and how you get off the island, and like there's really no way to do it. And so they're trying to figure out who's like killing everybody and who like brought them there to begin with, but also not die. And so it's this mystery of these 10 strangers. And I just thought it was so great. It's got that spooky kind of like solitary island in the middle of nowhere vibes. You've got these people trying to figure out who it is because it's definitely one of them, that whole thing. And it's also not a relatively long book, but it was like perfect for that mystery vibe that you might be going for this fall. The next one is if you also want some of those mystery vibes, but you are a fan of historical fiction. I've got you. And that is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is one that I actually just got my copy back from my mom because she recently read it. And this is great for book lovers who love a good mystery. We follow our main character whose name I'm forgetting because it's been quite a while, Daniel. And it's set in Barcelona in 1945. And he is brought to this kind of secret library of sorts where like you go in, you pick one book and that is your book, you take care of that book. And so he does, and he picks this book by an author that he's never heard of before, and he adores the book. I believe the book is called The Shadow of the Wind. And so he is obsessed with this book and tries to go out and find more things by this author. But then in the course of him trying to find more things by this author, he discovers that there's someone out there destroying all of this author's works, and I don't want you to know about it. And so he kind of gets sucked into this mystery of like who this author is, why these books are being destroyed, and how he can get his hands on more things. So perfect if you like that historical fiction vibe, perfect if you like books set in the 40s, but it does have that mystery element, and there's a little danger with it as well. Alright, for my fantasy fans, another good one is A Daughter of the Trolls, and this is by Mackenzie Catron. I've talked about this book quite a lot because I am obsessed with this book. This is a perfect YA fantasy book. For me, books set in like the woods, like a fantasy book set in woods, is perfect for the fall. I don't know why, if it's like the spookiness of like the woods or anything like that, but this book is set in the woods. also it's a great book and you should just read it. So this follows our main character, Sparrow. She's 18 years old and she lives in this place called the Glade. And this Glade has a bunch of different types of magical creatures, trolls, elves, sprites. Actually, I'm not even sure elves are part of there, but like a bunch of different types of people. However, she does live in a wheelchair because of a heart condition that she has that kind of keeps her there. And so like she gets really weak really quickly. And so something terrible happens in this glen and she ends up going on an adventure with her half-goblin friend Rush, and they go through the woods, which is very much not wheelchair friendly. And so it's this story that is told from own voices. The author herself is in a wheelchair and has kind of very similar situations to Sparrow. So it's really cool to kind of see the story from an own voices perspective and see like this world that she has created that is not accessible to people in wheelchairs. And I don't know, it was very fascinating, but also a fantastic story. It's got a lot of great conversations, like I mentioned, about disability and stuff like that. But at the heart of it, it's this beautiful fantasy story about a girl just like trying to find her mom, basically, and this friend who is going along with her, and like all the magic that comes with that. There's some terrible people in here, but it was so great and it's perfect for fantasy fans. Like seriously, if you like fantasy and you have not read this yet, you definitely need to, because it is so worth it. The next book is for my middle grade fans, or fans of like spookier. It's not spooky, but like it feels spooky, and that is the first in the Missing series, which is called Found, and this is by Margaret Patterson Haddix. This is a series that I have talked a lot about on this channel because I started it like a couple of years ago, I think, and I've made it almost to the end. I think I've got 2 books left in this series, but this one specifically has very spooky vibes to it. So I think that you would enjoy this if you like the feeling of thrillers, but like not being scared. So this one follows a couple of different characters. We've got Jonah and Chip, and Jonah is adopted, and his adoptive sister Catherine is also one of the main characters. And so he and his friend Chip, who we find out is also adopted, gets these letters in the mail that are like, I know who you are. And they're like, what is this? And so that leads them down the spiral of trying to figure out who their like biological parents are, where they've come from, and why this random person that they don't even know is like leaving these letters, like maybe not the letters, but messages for them in different places. And so it takes a turn, and the ending of this book really sets the motion for the rest of the series. So I'm very cryptic when it comes to the series because the reveal that comes at the end of this book is so fascinating. The rest of the series is just really interesting, but this book, out of the rest of them, is the most fall-like. So if you want to start the series or anything about the series that sounds good, I would highly recommend starting the first one in the fall, just because it gives you kind of like those spooky, unsettling vibes without being like terrifying. Alright, the next one is an entire series, and that is the Inheritance Games series. Now, technically, I can only recommend the first 2 because I haven't read the last book in the series yet, The Final Gambit, but I did want to show you that they were 3 in the series. But this series is great for people who like riddles and mysteries and like solving the mystery along with the person in the book. So this series starts with the Inheritance Games, goes to the Hawthorne Legacy, and finishes with the Final Gambit. But this series follows our main character, Avery, and she's kind of down on her luck. You know, she's making it paycheck to paycheck. She's living with her sister. She's trying to help out. She's in high school, just kind of trying to live. And she ends up being the sole heiress to this vast fortune by the Hawthorne family, primarily the like monarch of the Hawthorne family, who passes away and leaves it all to her. And so she ends up getting this mansion and like all of this money and doesn't know what to do with it, and is going to a private school. And she becomes very close with some of this guy's grandsons. There's a little bit of a love triangle going on here. And so it's really just like them trying to figure out why her. So like she goes down the spiral of trying to figure out why her. The grandsons are trying to figure out why her. And so it really is just an adventure. And I've really enjoyed these. The series is really bizarre because like the characters are, I'm not gonna lie, rather annoying people, but the story itself kept me on the edge of my seat. My husband, who doesn't not read nearly as much as I do, finished both of these in a day, like each one in like a respective day, and loves this series. Same thing as me, like I couldn't stop reading once I got sucked into the story. I just needed answers. I needed to find out why the stuff that was going on, and I just loved it a whole lot. So The first two for sure are very good, hoping to get to the third one myself soon, but this is a good series for people who like mysteries and riddles. Alright, the next one is for people who like mangas and like those kind of witchy vibes in mangas, and that is the Hat Atelier series. I have only read the first two in the series, but I have enjoyed both of them. So this series follows our main character, Coco, and it's in this world where you are thought, if you were a magician, you were kind of like born with magical powers. And she stumbles across a magician one day performing magic, and it turns out that it is not something you were born with, it is something that you learn. And so circumstances happen, and she eventually makes her way with this witch as he kind of like teaches her how to be magical. And so he takes her back kind of to like his house. He's got a couple of other apprentices as well, and it's her just kind of coming to terms with that. The series continues from there. There's kind of some like mysteriousness about her upbringing and like some dark forces and stuff like that, but it's got the perfect like witchy vibes to it. So if you want witchy stuff, but you want like a very easy book to get through, this is super cute. It's also a very good book to like introduce you to manga, I think, because even though like these stories are maybe not my most favorite mangas ever, they're still really, really good. They still give you that witchy vibe, and they still kind of introduce you to the style of manga without being like overly ridiculous, I guess. The next one I feel like doesn't need an explanation as to why it's on this list. I feel like it's very self-explanatory, but that is Fangs, and this is by Sarah Anderson. This is an amazing, absolutely fantastic graphic novel about a vampire and a werewolf who fall in love, and it's honestly the cutest thing I've ever seen. It is not spooky in any way. It's really just like slices of life as the two of them go about their life, and like each page has like different things, and like seriously each page is like a different comic almost, and like it's seriously just like a slice of life. I don't know how else to explain it. And it made me laugh out loud multiple times while reading it. Honestly, I'm probably gonna reread this around Halloween just because this is the spook that I like, because they're honestly so cute, and this is just gives you the atmosphere of like Halloween and things like that without being terrifying in any, like it's not scary at all. But it's an easy graphic novel and you can get through. It's really just kind of fun. Like I said, it's their like life and how they deal with being different species, and it's really it feels very much like you're watching this romance, and you're just watching them get like come to terms with each other, and it's just the differences they happen to be these mythical creatures rather than like just normal humans. I don't know, it's just there's something really, really cool about it, and I seriously very, very much recommend this book. It is so perfect to anyone who wants to be in like the spooky mood. The next one is the closest I think on this list to scary. I mean, it's still not, it's still relatively chill, but it is the closest, I will say, to something that could be remotely scary. And that is The Wren Hunt by Mary Watson. I read this, I think, last year around the fall, and it was honestly perfect. So this is set in a world where there's kind of like two different types of people. We have the augurs, and this is a druid faction that is made up of people who have like seer magic. And then you've got the judges, who are the druid faction that's made up of like lawmakers and things like that. So it's these two groups of people that really, really don't like each other. And we follow our main character, Wren. She's an augur, and I think she is coming to terms with her powers and stuff like that. But it really follows her as she goes undercover at this place called the Harkness Association, and that is a judge-run company. And so she goes there to basically kind of like find some sort of like information for her family to kind of like use against the judges. And of course, things don't go quite as planned. There's a lot more to this. That's a very, very lax explanation of it, but I picked this book up because of Ashley for Frolic Fiction. She really enjoyed this book, and I honestly picked it up because of her. So I believe I did this book and that BookTube Made Me series for her, but it's perfect. It's set kind of in the woods. It's got the like mysterious aspects of it, of like there is some sort of like witchiness of like these different magical powers, as well as some like rituals and stuff that do happen in this book, but it's really just this giant puzzle of her trying to figure out what's going on. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great, and I know that a lot of people have heard of this. I do think there's a sequel to this, but it's like unrelated. It's just like set in the same kind of world, which I may pick up at some point, but it's based on Irish mythology, which is really what grabbed my attention. So yeah, I highly recommend. Also look at this stunning UK cover. all I'm saying. The next series on this list is definitely one that I think was on a previous recommendations video, and that is The Ravens and the Monarchs, which is a duology that I have now officially finished as of August. So I read Ravens last year and the Monarchs this year, but this series I know I've talked way too much about on this channel, but seriously, if I have not convinced you to pick this book up yet, I'm somehow not doing it right. But we follow, basically, it takes place on a college campus, and we follow this group of girls who are a sorority on this campus. They're called the Ravens, and a lot of people think that they're very, like, elite, and like everyone wants to be part of their group because they only pick and choose very few people to be kind of part of their sorority. However, the sorority is actually a coven, and everyone who's in this sorority is actually a witch, and that's why only so many people are included in the sorority. So we follow two different people. We follow one girl named Scarlett, who is kind of being groomed to be the president of this sorority, and then another girl named Vivian, who has just come to college for the very first time and has no idea that she has magical powers, and they end up getting teamed up being little and big, and they are so opposite. And so it's the two of them, but there's a whole lot of extra stuff, like some weird stuff is happening behind the scenes. There's a lot of history with this coven that is not talked about a lot. There's some people who are out to get them. Some very dangerous things are happening, but this is perfect if you want the spooky, witchy vibes without being scary, because it's not scary. I mean, it has your moments of like you're on the edge of your seat, but like it's not scary in that sense. And then of course the Monarchs just kind of continues from what happens at the end of the Ravens. There is an ending of sorts to the end of the Ravens, so if you feel like you're done after one book, there's an ending, you can be done. But I loved the story continuing in the Monarchs and seeing them kind of like the repercussions of what happens at the end of the Ravens. So I highly recommend this series. I love it so much. It's got very light dark academia vibes, so if you like that college setting, this is perfect, and oh my gosh, please read it. The next one is, again, just fantasy set in the woods. I think people will really enjoy it. And that is Curse of the Wolf King by Tessonia Odette. This is the very first in her Entangled with Fae series, which is a series of standalones. You can pick and choose whatever you want to read from them. I know I talk about them all the time. There are currently 4 out, and each one is based on a different fairy tale. This one specifically is based on Beauty and the Beast. So this book primarily follows our 2 main characters. We have Gemma, who just wants to get away. Like, she cannot stand her family, she cannot stand her situation in life, and she just wants to get away. And then we've also got the male character, which is King Elliot, and he's plagued with a curse that may or may not take his life. He is a shapeshifter of sorts, and they basically strike up a bargain if like she can stay with him and kind of get away from her family if she can help him fall in love, because that's what's going to break this curse, and he can stay human, or no, he can stay in his wolf form or something. It's he can live basically, and of course that's not going to end well for them. So it was really fun. So this is a great book if you want that kind of like colder, atmospheric fall vibes. I would say this is probably better for later in the fall, because it does kind of have to do, like, it takes place in snow a lot of the time, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was perfect for fans of fairy tales, but with a new adult twist, because the series is new adult, and it definitely walks that line for sure. But I really enjoyed it, and I love this author's writing. I think it's so great, and I just love the twist that she does on these well-known fairy tales. All right, the next one, again, fantasy vibes as well, and that is Malice by Heather Walter. So this is the first in a duology. The second one is called Misrule, which I actually haven't read yet. And it says, once upon a time, there was a villain. And this story is a sapphic reimagining of Sleeping Beauty. So this takes place in a world where there are people called Graces, and they have like magical powers, and all of them are good, except for our main character Alice, who is a dark grace, and she is basically like has magical powers, but it's people come to her for curses and stuff like that. And she ends up getting mixed up with the Princess Aurora, who is supposed to like she has this curse on her that like she needs to get married to her true love, or like find her true love before I think she turns 18, or she'll die. And so she kind of like gets Alice to help her figure out who that's going to be. But it's really perfect. It's got the spooky vibes. It's got like the dark fantasy vibes, and I really enjoyed it. Plus you have a sapphic twist, which is very, at least from the books that I've read, not as common. And there's definitely a cliffhanger. So now that the second one is out, I think is a good time to read the first one to decide if you want to continue. But I really enjoyed it, and it definitely gives those like dark fantasy vibes. Speaking of dark fantasy vibes, I've got another fantasy retelling for you, and that is The Evil Queen by Jenna Showalter. This is a reimagining of, you guessed it, Snow White. So this takes place in the Forest of Good and Evil, where heroes may be villains and villains may be heroes. It all depends on who you ask, as it says up here. So this takes place in this world called Enchantia. And in this world, you are prophesized as of, like, you are going to be in a fairy tale, but you're not sure who you are. So you could be like, oh, you are going to be in the fairy tale of Cinderella. You are going to be in the fairy tale of Snow White, whatever it's going to be. But you're never sure how the fairy tale is going to end, who's actually going to be who in the fairy tale, and you just kind of know that that's going to be your story. We follow our main character Moro, who actually grew up in the human realm, and she's just been very obsessed with mirrors, and she basically gets sucked into Enchantia and goes on this mission and like on this adventure to try to figure out what the heck is going on, because it is very well prophesized that she is probably going to be the evil queen from the Snow White story. But is the story actually the way it appears? And so it's definitely, if you like Once Upon a Time, that TV show, you're going to love this book, because this gives me the same vibes as Once Upon a Time. It's got the same kind of like dark fantasy vibes, but you never know what the story's going to be. It's going to be a twist on the like actual fairy tale that you know. So I really enjoyed this. I do think there's a sequel to it, although it's like a companion sequel and has to do with the story of Cinderella. So I think you meet some of the main characters in this book, but as far as like reading one versus the other, I think you're probably totally fine. But I really enjoyed this one. It was a random pick, and it was really cool. I was very, very fascinated by this story, and I read it a while ago, but it has stuck with me, and I still clearly own it. So yeah, I think it's perfect if you want the fairy tale vibe for fall. The next one is the only one on this list that I can't explain why I feel like it would be a good fall book, but it's for fans of historical fiction, and that is Lovely War by Julie Berry. This is one that I've talked a lot about. I haven't talked a lot about it in a while, but I was obsessed with it when I read it. And it's a World War II story, but it has to do with the Greek gods. So it basically follows these two couples during World War II, and the different situations. Some of them are soldiers, some of them are part of like nurses in the war. Like, it's just these two couples as they go through the war. But it's told from the perspective of a bunch of different Greek gods. So because of a love story, you've got Aphrodite who's kind of telling it, you've got Apollo who's telling it because Ares, because he's the god of war. You also have Hades, because there's going to, of course, be a lot of death when it comes to war. And then actually I do think it is Apollo, and he kind of like helps with some of the life aspects, so the parts that don't have to do with war. And so it's all of them kind of giving a recap of this war, especially when it comes to these four people. And it was just really fascinating, because you're going to be very, very confused at the beginning, but it's going to make so much sense. And there's layers upon layers, because each story is different, and then there's a reason that the Greek gods are telling the story, and you kind of get that as you go through the book. But you don't really have to know about the Greek gods to understand this book. It's just that's how it's being told, is through them. So I think you can read this book even if you're not a fan of Greek mythology. Like, if you are a fan of like World War II stories, then I think you could still read this book, because while they just happen to be like the narrators of the story, they don't really have anything to do a whole lot with the story as far as like knowing what Greek god does what. And if you need to know, the book's going to tell you enough to get you through. So I thought it was really cool. It was very cozy. It was mysterious. It was perfect for like a good night to just like snuggle down with like a hot drink and read. So that's why I feel like it's a good fall book for people who like, you know, historical fiction and things like that. But that's about the only reason I have for it being on this list. But it was so good, and I feel like everyone should read it. All right, the next one is one that I read last year about this time, and it's perfect for the Halloween vibes, and that is Lord of Eternal Night by Ben Alderson. This is an indie published book. I honestly have like so many of this author's books at this point, and this is the only one that I have read. But it is a fantasy story about a vampire. So yes, I'm recommending a book about a vampire, even though I've talked about how much I am not a huge fan of vampire books. This one worked. I can't explain why. So this book follows our two main characters, Jack and Marius. And Jack is basically, I believe he's a witch, or he comes from a long line of witches, and every so many years a person is sent in on like a certain, like the blood moon or something, is sent into this castle where this like huge monster lives, and or what's thought to be a monster lives, and is like they're giving this person as food. And so Jack has magical powers, and so he is sent in basically to kill this guy. Well, the thing that he's being sent into is Marius, and he has this curse where he has to like suck the blood of somebody like once every so many years. But of course, it's a romance between the two of them, and things get a little interesting. Huge warnings, this is a very adult book, but like you don't see that a lot with male romances, so I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed having this like perfect fall book that was like spooky enough, where there's like fantasy elements, there's a vampire element, it's a male romance. There's just a lot about this book that I loved, and there is a second one in this series. It is called King of Immortal Tithe, and it's like a Hades and Persephone retelling. It's just kind of set in the same world. I'm hoping to get to that this fall. We shall see. But I really enjoyed this, and if you want a fantastic fantasy book with like all of the great spooky things, this is your book. And the very final book that we are going to be talking about, or I'm going to be recommending to you today, is perfect for fantasy fans, it's perfect for historical fiction fans, and it's perfect for fans of witchy books. And that is The Familiars, and this is by Stacey Halls. So this is very much like Salem Witch Trials feeling book, and I read it a while ago, but I really enjoyed it. So it takes place in 1612, and it takes place in England, and it follows a girl named Fleetwood Shuttleworth, who is expecting a child, and she basically stumbles across this letter from the doctor to her husband or something, where it basically is like says that she's not going to survive the birth of her child, and she is freaking out. And so she stumbles into this woman on the street whose name I'm forgetting, Alice, who is thought to be possibly a witch. We shall see. But she is basically been hired as this woman's midwife to kind of like see her through the birth, because she is hardcore freaking out. And so it's a relationship between these two women at a time when like witchcraft was like the way that they basically convicted any woman who spoke out. So you've got that, and then there's also this mysterious element of like, does Alice actually have powers or does she not? And so it's this question of that. But it was just an amazing story. There's a lot of twists and turns, there's a lot of mystery elements to this as well, but it's got that perfect witchy vibe to it. So I really enjoyed this. I thought it was quite good. And that's it. Those are all the books that I'm going to recommend to you today. I'm sure I could come up with so many more, like I did a couple, like those videos I talked about. There's so many more I could recommend. I'm sure by the end of this year I'll have even more books to recommend for perfect fall, like atmosphere and stuff. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know if these were helpful recommendations for you. If you'd like recommendations on more specific things, let me know. If you've got a recommendation yourself for someone like me who hates scary things but loves the atmosphere of Halloween and like fall and that kind of stuff. So let me know all of your thoughts down below. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you would like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there as well as other fun bookish links, so don't forget to check all that out, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!